Hello everyone, my name is Strange and I believe that people should know the truth. Every day, every hour, and every minute. Right now, someone is being abducted by aliens. This is always a drama for the families of the abducted because they will never know the truth about where their loved one has disappeared. I have secret documents in my hands right now regarding a mysterious kidnapping. The story is terrible and incredibly interesting at the same time. After studying all the materials, I decided to make it public. Since there are too many materials, the story will be released in 3 parts. As always, for the safety of my sources, all names have been changed and the documents have been given an artistic color. And so, I'm starting. A young man named Michael was sitting on the sand, which was still warm despite the evening. He and his wife Maria admired the sunset and were happy. Michael had been planning this vacation for a long time, insured against everything from overtime, which was actively imposed by his stupid boss from various force majeure. In the end, everything happened exactly as he had planned. And here they are, the young Hutchinson family, Michael, Maria, and their 5-year-old son Daniel on vacation in Coronado, San Diego, California. The man drank a cool Pepsi and hugged his wife by the shoulder. Her blonde hair caressed her neck pleasantly. It was safe and calm. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, filling the ocean with a yellow ruby light. Maria pulled away from her husband's shoulder and shouted, turning back to where a small 3-person tent stood right on the sand of the beach.
Daniel, run to us! Look at how beautiful the ocean is!
A dark-skinned boy came out of the tent clutching a bag of cookies and smiled at his mom and dad. He put on his sandals at the entrance to the tent and ran to his parents. The boy looked very much like his Italian-American mother. Daniel squeezed in between his parents and perched comfortably, staring at the ocean with all his eyes.
Daddy, are there whales in the ocean?
The man pulled up a pack of cigarettes from the sand, fished one out, and lit it, blowing smoke aside. Of course, and whales and all sorts of sea monsters. Boo! The woman laughed and looked at her husband with playful reproach.
Michael!
The man inhaled again, stretched out in surprise. Well, what about it? I served in the Navy. Here the man's intonation changed. He began to portray a desperate pirate from a children's cartoon. Yo ho ho! How many things I've seen! I harpooned Moby Dick with this very hand. The man jumped up and began to dance. I have traveled all 7 seas and stood under bullets when buckshot rained down from the sky on the deck. Then my leg was torn off by a damn English corps, and after that it grew back. The boy laughed and clapped his hands. Maria smiled ironically but looked with happy and loving eyes. Michael finished his impromptu performance and it lasted at least 15 minutes, which was what it was. The young man had an extraordinary imagination and love of life. The sun has already disappeared below the horizon, illuminating the sky with a dim, fading light upwards. Stars were appearing on the darkened strip of sky. Daniel yawned sleepily. Maria pulled him to her.
That's it, baby. It's getting cold, and you're already asleep. Go to the tent, pack up. Mom will be here soon.
The baby kissed his mother on the cheek and went to the tent. The woman remembered something and followed him, winking at her husband. After putting her son to bed, she quietly, so as not to make noise, unbuttoned a small refrigerator bag and took out 2 cans of beer, one for herself, the other for her husband. Maria and Michael clinked 2 tin cans together.
You know, honey, at such moments, I feel like a happy person.
Me too, dear. Maria stretched her lips to her husband, kissed him and hugged him. The husband hugged his wife in response and began to gently push her down on the sand, kissing her from above. An hour later, 2 lovesick bodies were lying right on the cape, which had been laid out in advance. It was calm and ordinary. I wanted to live and enjoy life.
We've come so far, honey. Which way is Washington?
His wife's head lay comfortably on Michael's chest. He stroked her hair, feeling the wet sand on his fingers. I don't even know, honey. It's probably there. The man pointed a finger at random to the side. Actually, you know, honey, I'm very glad that we finally managed to escape. You deserve this vacation. It's been a hell of a year. And it's good for Danny to get away from home. He's happy.
And I'm happy, darling.
The man stretched. That's nice. Maybe we should rinse off.
Come on, and we'll pack up. What are your plans for tomorrow?
Let's wake up, roll up the tent, and go further explore Coronado. A man and a woman holding hands entered the water of the ocean. the surface of which shimmered ghostly with moonlight reflected in the myriad clouds of plankton carried by the current to the coast. The moment was mysterious, pleasing, and a little disturbing. Michael was floating on his back and Maria was next to him. Both were looking at the stars and did not hear each other with their ears immersed in water. At that moment, the husband and wife felt the rotation of the planet, admired the Milky Way interspersed with billions of stars and nebulae. The sight was mesmerizing. But the grandeur of the heavenly stars left an imprint in the soul, reminded of its own insignificance and insignificance in the picture of the world. Maria shivered, her body lost its balance and began to sink into the water. The man quickly picked her up, stepped to the bottom and carried his wife to the shore in his arms.
What do you think, my love? Are we alone in the universe?
The man easily carried his naked wife in his arms and thought that Daniel was already asleep. Otherwise, he would have seen Mom and Dad in their natural form. He shook out his wet hair. I think, honey, we need to dry off and get dressed. As for the universe, I'm sure we're not alone. Maybe someone is watching us now, huh? Michael made a frightening sound. Bow, and gently bit his wife's neck with his lips. From the conclusion of the Preliminary Investigation Commission, Department of Investigation, State of California, San Diego.
At 06:00 in the morning, during a sanitary inspection of the beach area on the west coast of Coronado Island, employees of the Diego Resort Administration discovered a 3-person tent burned on one side and a naked man unconscious. The police and employees of the 2nd Coast Guard Department were called to the scene. The man needed immediate medical attention, which was provided by a full-time Coast Guard doctor. Later, the man was taken to the San Cristofan Hospital at Federico 26.
Michael struggled in the ambulance after coming to his senses. He shouted and demanded that the car be stopped. The doctors could not understand anything from his screams. They stated the strongest shock. When Michael got up from the wheelchair and grabbed one of the doctors by the collar, the nurse injected him with an ampoule of sedative. Michael began to slump on the cot. The doctor was used to various kinds of reactions, and this time he just adjusted the collar of his robe, looked at Michael with a skeptical look. The main health indicators were normal. A severe bruise of the back was diagnosed, a small burn under the right nipple. Further examination will be performed at the clinic. Previously, it can be concluded that the condition of a man does not cause concern for life. The burn under the right nipple, round, with smooth edges, was mistaken for a bullet wound, a blind wound from a small caliber or traumatic weapon, but the ambulance doctor refuted this assumption, a normal, closed burn, possibly from a cigarette. The doctor has seen everything and everyone. Recently, a woman was picked up who was beaten and fucked by her boyfriend, and then put out cigarettes on her buttocks. Moreover, the victim herself, in quotes, demanded that she be released as soon as possible to a loving boyfriend with oddities. Michael was lying in the medical ward. The fixation on his hands had long been removed. When he regained consciousness, he realized himself that nothing could be achieved by violence. Reluctantly, he held on, answered clearly. Periodically, his voice broke, but within limits. Although there was hell going on in his soul, which he himself could not figure out. I'm telling you for the 100th time, I was on the beach with my wife and child. They're gone. Do you understand or not? They were gone. A fat mustachioed detective was sitting in front of the bunk. His shirt barely met on his belly. The view was somewhat ridiculous. It was Inspector Fowlis, nicknamed the Skinny Fox by his colleagues. Despite his absurd and ridiculous appearance, the inspector was an ace in his field.
Mr. Hutchinson, we organized a search team immediately after you reported your wife and son missing. Understand that the more openly you tell us about the circumstances of that evening, the sooner we will get the result. This is my job.
So why the hell are you not working but sitting here? I've already told you everything. The detective looked clear and simple, friendly, but maintained absolute seriousness. Once again, it's the same thing. The victims accuse the employees of the criminal department and think that the detective's job is to consume gallons of coffee, eat donuts, and do nothing.
I understand your concern, Mr. Hutchinson, but please, let's look back at the circumstances of that evening.
Michael sighed, clutched the sheet with his palms, and squeezed his fingers tightly. He barely restrained himself from falling into hysterics again. I have already said, and I repeat, I have been staying with my family on the coast since the evening. We pitched a tent, spent time. Then, I can't remember exactly, but my wife fell on the sand. Something dragged her, invisible. Then she just disappeared. The man shook, the nurse standing next to the inspector went out into the corridor, and a minute later the doctor entered the room.
Excuse me, Inspector. Just a few more minutes and that's it. The patient is in a state of severe nervous and neurological stress.
The inspector paid no attention to the doctor.
Mr. Hutchinson, did you see the men who took her away?
No, she just got covered in light and flew to the sky. The same thing happened to my son later. He was asleep. Where? Where is my family? The doctor peremptorily pointed the detective to the door and went to the bed, turned to the nurse.
Prepare half a cube of clozapine. Then prepare the patient for a psychiatric examination.
Michael, who had received the injection, looked at the detective. Consciousness began to fog up. Find them, I beg you, find them. Detective Fowles put on his hat and walked towards the exit, saying clearly,
This is my job.
In the evening, 3 days later, the detective was sitting in his office, in which, in addition to government furniture and office equipment, one could see objects memorable for the family. In the closet, under glass, there were mismatched cups for winning shooting competitions and the bowling championship. In the local bowling alley between adjacent departments, also under the glass in a prominent place, stood a slightly bent child's drawing with a cute inscription, Daddy. Detective Fowles was sitting at the table, stretched the dictaphone across the surface of the tabletop and turned it on. Michael's voice sounded far away. To understand the man's pain and panic, you had to see him. However, the recording was not intended to be re-listened to for the sake of idleness. The live audio recording was intended for the ears of psychologist Samantha Crane, who became famous in the recent case of the capture of a sexual maniac operating on the coast in San Diego.
What do you say, Samantha?
A beautiful, well-groomed woman in a business suit sat down on a chair.
What can I say? The man is in a state of extreme stress, scared of something. He constantly asks where his family is. He probably witnessed something terrible. Maybe drugs?
The inspector shook his head negatively.
No, the test showed only 0.5 ppm, which corresponds approximately...
A can of beer?
The inspector nodded.
In addition, Hutchinson is in good standing at his place of work. He is a law clerk at the Washington Building Trust, and my gut tells me that something terrible really happened. Samantha, what about his testimony about the light and his flying wife and son?
The woman frowned.
You see, Mark, Samantha addressed the inspector by name. This may be a protective reaction of the psyche to severe stress. His wife and child could have been raped right in front of him. They could have just been killed. Are there footprints there?
The inspector shook his head again.
A preliminary inspection of the scene did not give any traces. The area was cordoned off. But at noon, there was already a real mess. You know? We can't put guards on the beach.
I understand. Absolutely no trace? Maybe blood?
No. They found only one melted beer can. Experts are dealing with it. By the way, we were able to identify the victim's identity from the bank. Fingerprints. At first, he did not remember his name, but at the same time he clearly remembered the loss of his wife and child, the bright light, and the flight. That's all.
Samantha frowned.
Bright light. A tent on the beach. Do you remember when we investigated the beach firefly case? That jerk who broke into the tents of couples, blinded them with a powerful flashlight, and then cut them up? Did one of the victims survive?
Yes, Sidney Monsford. But as you remember, Firefly was sentenced to 2 life sentences and is now serving his sentence in state prison.
Maybe a copycat? Or I can have a conversation with Mr. Hutchinson myself.
Okay, baby. We'll try to arrange it. The victim himself has been assigned a psychiatric examination.
Michael Hutchinson couldn't figure out what was going on. He scolded himself for the 100,000th time for freaking out, for starting to talk about flashes of light and other devilry, which was exactly, absolutely exactly, he had seen everything himself. The look of his wife, full of pleading and fright, her open mouth, something terrible and dark coming across the sky from the ocean, and then illuminated by a flash. After the first psychiatric examination, he was transferred here to Trocadero, a closed-regime psychiatric clinic. Surveys and other research have also been conducted here. He no longer believed that he had ever been a healthy person. And somewhere there was his wife and child. Michael stood in the middle of a small room, measuring the walls, upholstered in thin polymer. External communication with the world. Armored transparent glass shone with summer light. How long has he been here? At first he tries to explain everything, then he just agreed with everything. When a female psychologist from the Department of Investigations came to him, he believed that everything would change, and they would help him soon, and most importantly, they would find a wife and child. But he was wrong. The psychologist made notes in her notebook, nodded her head, agreed, and asked questions again. The doctors behaved the same way. To them, he was a patent lunatic, and the only thing they did together was convince him of his mental inferiority. The door rattled with locks. 2 huge orderlies entered the room, and with them the doctor, always courteous, kind, bald old man.
Good morning, Mr. Hutchinson. How are you feeling? So, the doctor opened the patient's personal card. Today we have a hypnotherapy session, then procedures, and after that, you have an appointment with the inspector of the Department of Investigations.
Michael looked at the doctor hopefully. Maybe the case will finally move forward. Some information may be received, but Michael had been taught by bitter experience. He hid his excitement. Thank you, doctor.
Great, get ready. Get yourself in order. The nurse will come for you soon.
Michael remembered the detective. A fat, short man in a hat, smoking a cigarette from under his mustache. This was already at the second interrogation at the station before he rattled here. The first time they met was at the clinic. Today, something will be decided. From the preliminary medical report, Trocadero Clinic.
Patient Michael D. Hutchinson shows persistent signs of acute schizophrenia. The reason could be a very strong, momentary stress. Currently, a complex of necessary therapeutic and medicinal procedures is being carried out.
Based on the results of instrumental research,
Patient Michael D. Hutchinson, 27 years old, suffers from severe heart failure and arrhythmia. Constantly uses an implanted heart rhythm driver. Currently, the rhythm driver has been replaced. The pre-installed one was damaged by temperature exposure to the chest area. Upon examination, a severe burn was found under the right nipple. In addition, the patient has a mirror location of the heart, a rare congenital condition. The brain encephalogram did not reveal any abnormalities in the structure, nor were there any metabolic disorders of brain tissues, which additionally indirectly confirms the version of an acute schizophrenic crisis amid stress.
the doctor in charge of Michael's condition also expected the arrival of a detective, for whom a special pass was issued. Like Michael, he was expecting Detective Fowles, who was investigating the disappearance of Hutchinson's wife and son, but despite everything, a completely unknown man appeared, who somehow managed to get into the territory using a pass issued to Fowles. The doctor looked at the inspector's certificate in surprise.
I'm sorry, but how did you manage to get into the Trocadero territory? We were expecting Detective Fowles. A pass for him had been ordered in advance.
The man in the black jacket smiled coldly.
Detective Fowles has been suspended from the investigation as of today. Before we continue the conversation, you should familiarize yourself with the following document.
The man handed the doctor a small half-sheet A4 blank card on which was written the following.
The holder of a special pass card is endowed with special powers and performs a special task of the government. Refusal of assistance is considered as high treason.
At the bottom of the map there was a sweeping signature and many seals. In the middle, a watermark in the form of an American flag, and a yellow-billed eagle was drawn through the letters. The abbreviation was SDS, a Special Department of Secret Investigations. The doctor did not understand anything at all. He looked at the card, then at the man who presented it.
Excuse me, are you from the FBI? Has the case reached the federal level?
The man sat down without asking and smiled.
Yes, the case of Michael Hutchinson is supervised by a government commission. What can you say specifically about his condition?
The doctor repeated what he thought was the only right thing: acute schizophrenia caused by severe stress.
Okay, this is quite logical because our staff could not find intelligible traces at the scene. In addition, traces of his wife and child were not found. I can say even more.
The doctor looked at the inspector with interest.
Michael Hutchinson never had a wife and child at all. There is no information about them in his biography. In addition, he was registered, and a few years ago he served time for hooligan and deviant behavior in Washington National Park.
The doctor raised his eyebrows in surprise. The inspector's tone and what he was saying did not like the doctor, and it was absurd.
But we were given his personal medical card at the residential address, indicated by the patient, an insurance policy. There is no information in the card about his insanity or about his observation at the clinic of penicilleries.
The man smiled again, a smile that was wandering, uncertain, sly, and arrogant at the same time.
That's right, Doc. That's right. After admission to the Columbia County Jail, a new card was placed on the prisoner, which is not disclosed to civilian institutions, and as for psychiatric supervision at the place of residence, after a brief observation, he was bailed out by the local Christian society. Most likely the card was lost or stored with them. As you can see, we have made thorough inquiries about Michael Hutchinson.
I don't understand anything at all. So will you be conducting a conversation with the patient?
The inspector, or who he really was, got up.
You don't need to understand anything, you just have to help us. Yes, it is for us, because I represent government agencies. I have a specific question and an assignment for you.
The doctor, who stopped drinking many years ago, at this moment felt a steady desire to knock over another glass of good vodka with lemon. He spread his hands.
I'm at your service, Mr.
Mr. Taylor, just Mr. Taylor to you. So during the examination of the patient, were any anomalies found?
No, it's nothing special. Although you can familiarize yourself with everything yourself.
The doctor got up and turned to the cabinets behind the table, ran his fingers over the spines, and pulled out the necessary folder from the preliminary medical report, Trocadero Clinic.
During an ECG and ultrasound of the heart, a metal object implanted in the heart and involved in natural life-supporting processes was found in the structures of the left ventricle.
The inspector looked at the doctor with narrowed, predatory eyes.
Have you extracted this structure?
The doctor shook his head.
No, as you could read, it provides heart function. Hutchinson's patient is a core, and we are not the cardiology department of a surgical center. If you notice the sign at the entrance, then you are now in the Trocadero Psychiatric Clinic.
The situation was heating up. To diffuse it somehow, the inspector smiled.
Don't get too excited, Doctor. So I told you that I would have an assignment for you. Currently, the investigation into the disappearance of his wife and child has been closed. I have given you the reason. What is required of you is to achieve a stable remission of the patient, to help him get rid of schizophrenic visions and thoughts about the incident. Don't you agree that Hutchinson has schizophrenia?
The doctor was already not sure of anything himself. Everything seemed crazy strange.
Yes, we will do everything possible to bring the patient back to society.
Great. Remember, from now on, you work directly for the special department.
On this note, the inspector took his leave, leaving the doctor alone. In more than 20 years of practice, such a case was the first in his memory. An ordinary patient delivered in a state of severe depression, latent stress with signs of schizophrenia, and suddenly a guy from a certain government service is interested in him. God knows what's going on. By evening, the doctor began to take root in the idea that most likely Michael Hutchinson still had both a wife and a child. But something really happened to them, something terrible, and most likely in front of a man. The brain and consciousness, affected by stress, hid memories, erased or disguised with something else. Something that could seem phantasmagoric, and most likely with his family. Something terrible was completely some son or daughter, or maybe a group of teenagers who are now being protected from retaliation by a government jerk. The doctor recalled the case of the senator's son, Abraham Stones, who was involved in drug trafficking and the involvement of young women in prostitution. One of the victims was also taken to the clinic with a bunch of memories and impressions that led her to attempt suicide. It was at the clinic that she gave her first testimony against Abraham. Then in this very office at different times, on this very chair opposite, there were also two guys. One FBI agent investigating the case of Abraham Stones, who wanted to put him behind bars, and the second from the National Security Agency, trying to cover up the case and protect Stones. Then the FBI agent won, and the senator's son was handcuffed and taken to court, and from there to prison. Now, apparently, darker, dirtier forces were winning. The doctor pulled the phone towards him.
Martha, come in. I want to give orders about the patient M. Hutchinson.
40-year-old Martha hurriedly entered the office, having prepared a medical form.
Good afternoon, Dr. McD. I have prepared a blank form.
The doctor nodded.
You're a good girl. So transfer Hutchinson's patient to the general observation ward where patients with mild cases stay. Place him in the ward with patients entering remission, prescribe light occupational therapy, and unsupervised walks in a closed section of the park. Remove the drug therapy.
But he has schizophrenia, doctor.
Martha, your job is to follow my orders. In addition, assign the patient a repeated cardiological examination. Prepare a map of the drugs that the patient takes.
The doctor saw Martha's face darken at his harsh tone.
Martha, you're a smart girl. Forgive me for my tone. Today is a difficult day. Just follow my instructions and also prepare the patient for the interview.
With whom?
With me, in this very office, okay?
Martha nodded and went to the exit.
Martha, stay late. I ask you to excuse me again. Did the inspector who came in talk to you? Maybe he left a business card?
No, he went straight to your office, didn't talk to me.
All right, darling, you are free.
The day started well, but by noon, with the arrival of the inspector, everything had changed. It turned upside down. Government? Well, fuck him. The government. The Republicans once again stood at the head of the United States along with D. Trump, and the doctor was an ardent conservative, a southerner by origin. He decided to figure everything out himself. Dr. McD called in a patient at the clinic, Michael Hutchinson. A whole year has passed since he was installed here.
Have a seat, Mr. Hutchinson. How are you feeling?
It's fine, doctor. If my condition can be called normal. The doctor winced as if from a sore tooth.
I understand everything, and I guess a lot. Two serious forces are involved. It seems to me that your stay here has saved you from...
From what?
From death. I do not know what happened to you then, but my experience tells me that what you said is true.
It doesn't make me feel any better. At first, Hutchinson was injected with powerful tranquilizers, depressed consciousness, and the work of the hemispheres of the brain. His pseudo-schizophrenia was treated, but then Dr. McD imposed a ban and everything changed. But those exercises dulled the suffering. Thoughts about his wife and child, extremely acute and painful, began to fade into the background. The fire and anger in his heart went out. Within a year, he realized that they were dead. They were no more. After the withdrawal of medication, Michael thought about running away, but then realized the futility of both thoughts and imaginary attempts.
I understand everything. The only thing I can do for you is to let you out of the clinic now. Today, we will assume that you have gone into remission. The orderly will forget to close your room and leave the corridor, and your card, which we have entered, will disappear because you will die of an attack of acute heart failure.
The doctor reasoned as if he were saying these words to himself, but Michael understood that the words were addressed specifically to him. I understand. The clinic was left behind, as well as the horror of forced imprisonment, powerlessness. All I can think about is my family and what happened back then. The past life was destroyed. Destroyed by circumstances that, like a raging ocean, picked up light splinters of life and sank. Only one floated out, and that one was twisted. The awakened heart and soul longed for revenge, for a fight, but with whom? Michael did not return to Washington. Before escaping from the clinic, Dr. McD helped with a small amount of money, indicated a person who could help with documents. And that's it. One autumn day, immersed in himself, who had become silent during the year of the clinic and subsequent wanderings, Michael sat on a bench in a city park in Atlanta, drank coffee, and stared in front of him. Did he think about life and his fate? Is unknown. An elderly woman sat down on a bench next to him, turned her head, and smiled affably.
Do you know there used to be a lake in this park?
Michael looked at the elderly woman absently and did not answer.
Swans swam on it. It was an indescribable beauty.
Michael looked at the woman and didn't know what to say to her. Suddenly, she looked him straight in the eyes, the grey, cold eyes of a man who had been through the greatest pain.
After all, my relatives were also kidnapped.
Michael's body trembled. His heart ached. There was not enough money to support his work. There was not enough for medicines, for a planned replacement of the rhythm driver. He resigned himself to this thought and prepared to die. But this woman's words pushed life into her heart with a spasm of pain. What? What did you say? The woman didn't say anything, but just handed Michael a small business card. She got up slowly and left. Michael looked at the neat piece of paper on which it was written.
We all know we care. 43 Elijah Avenue, basement tonight.
He looked up from his business card. The woman was walking along the path towards the exit from the park. My first impulse was to catch up with her, turn her around to face me and ask. But he read the card to the end. No need to catch up with anyone. 43. Elijah Avenue, basement. Evening. The basement was in semi-darkness, dispelled by a table lamp that stood on the floor. There were 6 chairs in a circle around the lamp. Apparently the conversation had been going on for a long time. When Michael went down to the open basement, there were already people sitting on the chairs. 5. The 6th was intended for him. Michael walked closer and saw the elderly lady he had seen in the park earlier in the day. She put her finger to her lips to signal silence and pointed to a chair. Michael sat down. Opposite him, a thin man with long arms and large palms spoke slowly and scratched the cuticles of his nails, sometimes nervously clenched his fists.
My wife and I were vacationing in Aspen, in the mountains of Colorado. On the way back, as we were driving along the highway, we were abducted by Greys. They dissected my wife, cut off the pieces of her arms, legs. She was suffering, but they wouldn't let her die. They made me watch. I've seen everything. They let me go. After that, I dreamed of death.
An elderly woman put her hand on the man's head, stroked his hair.
You're among friends now, Bob. You're safe. We will find a way to fight them. We will take revenge.
Then the word passed to the young woman, who spoke in a barely audible, sibilant whisper, which was interrupted by a mute movement of her mouth, but then sounded again.
I was sleeping in my house. My husband was nearby. They kidnapped me, the Greys, and raped me on their ship. I remember every moment. I remember everything.
The young woman could not stand it and began to cry. That's how the word got to Michael. Everyone was looking at him, waiting, but he didn't dare. The old woman came up to him.
Michael, you are among friends, among people who will understand you. Don't be afraid.
For the first time in recent years, Michael burst into tears like a child. With tears, his soul was freed from hardships. He felt that he was really among people who would believe him and understand. He began his story by recalling details that poisoned his heart with bitterness. He rubbed his chest over and over again, overcoming the pain, but he felt on the edge. It is unknown from where, but the elderly lady knew about his insufficiency. She handed him an oblong nitro spray flask. After drinking, the heart let go a little. Thank you. But who are you? An elderly man in a sports hoodie came out of the darkness of the basement.
Today, we are the only united resistance against aliens in the United States. We collect evidence and prepare analytical information for each case. Now we can say with confidence that you, Michael, like Bob, the man pointed to the first thin man on the chair. They were subjected to a psychological experiment conducted by the Greys. They separate families or torture members of the same family in front of each other. What for? We don't know yet.
Michael was thirsty. Always when his heart let go a little, he was very thirsty. But what are you going to do about it? After all, the government... The man chuckled.
The government has been in league with them for a long time. After all, you know about it yourself.
Michael was silent. From the conclusion of a doctor working for the Resistance Center.
An observation device, a chip disguised as a tricuspidal valve of the heart muscle, was implanted in Michael Hutchinson's chest. It is not possible to remove the chip since it is involved in the work of the heart. Decontamination measures have been taken. Currently, the patient is stable. The rhythm driver and the stimulator of sinus node activity have been replaced.
6 months have passed since then. Michael became actively involved in the work of the resistance, collecting and systematizing information. Painstakingly, carefully. In the depths of his soul, he kept the thought that he would be able to meet his wife and child. This thought was inherent in all participants from the closed community. Even Bob, who convinced himself that his wife was alive and their meeting was possible. Michael wasn't interested in who the older woman and the man were at the first meeting in the basement. He just believed them. Dr. McD was sitting in the living room of a country house, enjoying a glass of orange juice and waiting for the arrival of his grandchildren. He nevertheless gained courage and determination and resigned. Dear Doctor on state support in his country house, what more could you want? The grandchildren will arrive soon and will splash in the pool all day, and in the evening please him, the old man, with their children's company and simple conversation.
Charles, can I get you some more juice?
Yes, dear, please.
My wife came out of the kitchen and straightened her apron. Then she returned to the kitchen, poured the juice into a clean glass and brought it to her husband.
Are you enjoying the silence again? Turn on the TV. Maybe Trump is planning to build a new wall on the border with Mexico.
The man laughed. To him, a southerner and a conservative, the idea of a wall with Mexico gave enthusiasm, if only such a wall could be built in the middle of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It would be great. After all, Republicans in the government are also visited by sensible thoughts. Charles McD took the bullets from the TV. Everything is on the screen, as always. Fuss and all sorts of mess. So this time, a young announcer on CNN was talking about an emergency.
Today at 2 p.m., the head of the department in charge of NASA's innovative developments was killed near his home at the intersection of Elliott and Peachtree Streets. The deceased was shot with an automatic weapon in his car. The attacker fled on a motorcycle.
McD was looking at the screen. Some doctors were pulling a gurney with a corpse. The white blanket swayed, probably from the wind. A pale, bloodless face was revealed. It was the same inspector who had come to him at the Trocadero Clinic almost 2 years ago and made inquiries about Michael Hutchinson. It was him, without a doubt, Inspector Taylor. McD recognized him immediately. Michael managed to get away. He raced at full speed on the sports bike down the street. There in the alley, he threw out a compact machine gun, discharged it into the car of an inspector who sold his soul to alien scum. After that, he moved into a passenger sedan and then changed the car again already at the exit from the suburbs. I managed to get away. The inspector was just the top. Maybe he knew perfectly well who he was serving, but he was following orders. Characters even more smeared in all this shit. Who knew exactly what was going on and what the Greys needed? Michael clenched his fist. We'll get to all of you. From Dr. McDee's personal diaries.
I talked to Michael Hutchinson personally. After all, despite the fact that I am a good psychiatrist, I am also a good psychologist. I managed to find out something. Michael saw not only the light and how his wife was flying away in an unknown direction, as well as his child. When falling asleep, under the influence of Gambadrol, patient Hutchinson fell into a state of verbose delirium. I personally recorded about 16 hours. The dictaphone recordings are stored in a safe place that only my wife knows about. Someday the public will need this. Information about the devilry that is happening on our planet, beyond the control of ordinary people. Hutchinson encountered one of the eerie, inhuman manifestations of beings endowed with intelligence, but not belonging to our world.
From voice recordings. In the glow of the light that surrounded Daniel, I saw tall, long, elongated creatures. They seemed flat, non-existent, disembodied. Two of them pulled my wife by the legs, and then they took off with her, over the ocean. One of the same creatures carried my son. When I screamed, the fourth creature pointed an oblong object at me and something cauterized my chest. I felt something alive cling to me, and then froze somewhere under my heart. If you think that this is not proof of the existence of aliens, then you are right. There is much more evidence, and on our channel we will reveal all the secrets and evidence of their presence. Share this video on your social networks, because you need maximum publicity. And also subscribe to the channel and send me your stories related to aliens by email. You will find contacts in the About the Channel section. If I haven't answered you, then I'm still checking on you, because the special services of all countries have announced a hunt for me. But together, we will force the authorities to disclose all the information they have. After all, people should know the truth.